The Rift, Chapter 1, The Beginning of the End. My name is Alex Carter. I'm 21 years old. I grew up in a small town just outside Oakridge City. It was one of those places where everyone knew everyone, a place where you could never really hide. And for me, that was the problem. I was always the odd one out, the kid who never quite fit in. While the other kids played outside, I was the one tucked away in my room, diving into worlds where I could be anyone, anywhere. Video games were my escape, my refuge from the real world, especially MMORPGs, where I could be powerful, important, where I could matter. But as I grew older, that passion turned into an obsession. I started skipping classes, staying up all night. My parents were worried, always at my door, begging me to come out, to live a real life. But I couldn't hear them over the sound of my keyboard, over the thrill of leveling up, of winning. They tried everything: therapy, counseling, even took away my computer once. I remember that day. I felt like they had cut off my lifeline. So I fought back, harder than ever, refusing to listen to their pleas, their threats. I dropped out of college, moved to Oakridge City, alone. I told myself it was freedom, but really, I was just running away. Running to the only place where I felt like I mattered. Here, in the city, I became Jinx, a legend in the gaming community. My skills were unmatched. I was making a living as a professional gamer, but outside the virtual world, I was still just Alex, an awkward kid in a big city, trying to find a place that felt like home. The screen flickered, casting dancing shadows across my face. It was a familiar sight, one that had become a nightly ritual. My fingers flew across the keyboard, years of practice ingrained in muscle memory. Each keystroke was a step deeper into a world where I felt truly alive. The outside world faded away, the cluttered apartment, the unanswered messages, the weight of expectation. It all seemed so distant, almost irrelevant. Here, in this digital realm, I was in control. Every decision was mine to make, every outcome a direct result of my actions. I was a leader, a warrior, a force to be reckoned with. In this space, I commanded respect and admiration. My avatar moved with a grace and power I could only dream of possessing in reality. It was an extension of my ideal self, unburdened by the limitations of the physical world. Each victory brought a surge of adrenaline, a validation that was intoxicating. It was a high that kept me coming back, night after night. The real world offered nothing but disappointment, a constant reminder of my failings. Bills piled up, responsibilities were neglected, and the weight of it all was crushing. Here, I could be anyone, anything I wanted. The possibilities were endless, limited only by my imagination. But even the most immersive games couldn't completely erase the hollowness that lingered within. It was a void that no amount of digital triumphs could fill. The more I retreated into the digital world, the more fractured my real life became. The contrast between my virtual victories and real-world failures grew starker with each passing day. Relationships withered from neglect, replaced by fleeting online connections that offered the illusion of companionship without the messy complexities of genuine human interaction. It was easier to manage, but far less fulfilling. The guilt gnawed at me, a constant whisper in the back of my mind. It reminded me of the life I was letting slip away, the opportunities I was missing. But the allure of escape was too strong to resist. The digital world was a siren's call, promising adventure and excitement. So I dove deeper, seeking solace in pixels and code, telling myself it was only temporary, that I could always unplug and return to reality whenever I chose. It was a comforting lie, one I clung to desperately. But deep down, a part of me knew that I was teetering on the edge of a precipice, and the fall promised to be long and unforgiving. The line between my two worlds was blurring, and I feared the day when I might not be able to find my way back. It began subtly, almost imperceptibly. A flicker in the periphery, a momentary glitch that seemed insignificant, a distortion in the game's familiar graphics, a brief anomaly that was easy to overlook. At first, I dismissed it as lag, a common enough occurrence in the world of online gaming. Lag was something every gamer experienced, a minor annoyance that we all learned to live with. But the glitches grew more frequent, more persistent, each one more intrusive than the last. The air crackled with static, electronic devices malfunctioned, and a low hum vibrated through the air, setting my teeth on edge, a constant reminder that something was amiss. The discomfort was palpable, a gnawing sensation that something was terribly wrong. I was in the middle of a tournament, my fingers dancing across the keyboard, the game consuming my every thought. The intensity of the moment was electrifying, every move calculated, every second critical. When suddenly, the screen exploded in a blinding flash of light, a burst so bright it seared my vision. When I regained my senses, felt dazed, as if I were floating somewhere between reality and the virtual world I had just left behind. My fingers were numb from hours of relentless button mashing, my knuckles stiff and aching, but I barely noticed the pain. My eyes were burning, stinging from staring at the screen for so long, yet I couldn't tear them away. The intense blue light had seared itself into my retinas, making the room around me seem dark and hazy in comparison. But despite the exhaustion creeping into my limbs and the weariness weighing down on me, I was still riding that high, an intoxicating rush of adrenaline and satisfaction, the kind you only get after a great game. It was the feeling of victory, of having conquered impossible odds, of pushing yourself to the limit and coming out on top. It was the thrill that had kept me hooked for years, that kept me coming back for more, no matter how many times I told myself I should take a break. It was the only time I felt truly alive. My stomach growled, reminding me I hadn't eaten in hours. I glanced at the clock. It was past midnight. I grabbed my wallet, my keys, and headed out, thinking I'd grab some snacks from the 24-hour convenience store down the street. But as soon as I stepped outside, I knew something was wrong. The city, usually buzzing with life even at this hour, was silent. Too silent. A cold wind whipped through the empty streets, carrying with it the distant sound of fire. I walked faster, my steps echoing in the quiet night. The air felt heavy, thick with smoke. I started to notice things: abandoned cars, shattered glass on the ground, storefronts with their windows blown out. And then I saw it. Buildings that had once been symbols of progress and civilization were now grotesque and unrecognizable. In the center of the city, there was a portal, massive, swirling with dark energy. It was like a tear in reality itself, a gateway to somewhere else, somewhere dark, dangerous. It was as if the very heavens had been torn asunder, the natural order upended, and from that portal, creatures began to emerge, monsters, demons, things I had only ever seen in games. They poured out like a flood, eyes glowing with malice, claws sharp enough to cut steel, skin covered in scales or leathery hides, their eyes burning with a cold, predatory hunger. They were here, in our realm, and they were hunting, their presence a harbinger of the new world order. My heart was pounding in my chest. I wanted to run, but my feet felt glued to the ground. I stood there, watching as the first wave of monsters tore through the city, ripping apart anything in their path. It was like the end of the world. The city, once a symbol of human achievement, had become a hunting ground. I thought, this can't be real. But it was. It was too real, and I was standing right in the middle of it. Familiar landmarks were reduced to rubble, the air thick with the stench of fear and decay. I navigated the ruined streets, my senses on high alert. The once comforting glow of my phone was gone, its battery drained by the strange energy pulsating through the air. Around every corner lurked danger, the whisper of unseen horrors sending shivers down my spine. I had spent years honing my skills in virtual worlds, mastering the art of combat and strategy. But this was no game. This was a desperate fight for survival, where death lurked around every corner, its icy grip a constant threat. The rules I had lived by, the strategies I had relied upon, meant nothing in the face of this unrelenting onslaught. The alleyway reeked of garbage and despair. I pressed myself against the grimy brick wall, my heart pounding against my ribs. The creatures were close, their guttural growls echoing off the buildings. They hunted with an instinct honed in some hellscape, their senses attuned to the slightest movement, the faintest sound. Panic threatened to consume me, but I forced it down, drawing on years of training, of remaining calm under pressure. This was no different than a high-stakes raid, a sudden ambush. A surge of adrenaline coursed through me, sharpening my senses, pushing aside the fear. This new world was terrifying, chaotic, but it was also exhilarating. For the first time in my life, the stakes were real, the consequences absolute. And in that moment of stark clarity, I knew I wouldn't go down without a fight. I looked back over my shoulder, my breath coming in short, frantic gasps. More demons were pouring out of the portal, an endless tide of dark, twisted shapes spilling into the streets, spreading out like an unstoppable wave of shadows. Their screeches and roars filled the air, a terrible, deafening chorus of chaos and destruction. I could see their eyes, dozens, hundreds of glowing red orbs staring hungrily, scanning for their next victim. I knew I had to get out of there. My mind was screaming, my body already moving, trying to propel me forward. I had to find somewhere safe, somewhere they couldn't reach me. But where? Where could I possibly go in a city that was tearing itself apart? My mind raced with 1,000 thoughts. Were there others out there trying to survive like me? Was I the only one left? Was I completely alone in this nightmare? I could feel the cold sweat running down my back, the fear crawling up my spine like a living thing. Every instinct told me to run, to hide, but hide where? I was surrounded by flames, by destruction, by creatures straight out of a nightmare. Then, in that moment of utter panic, a memory surfaced. Something my mom used to say when I was just a kid, scared of the dark. Sometimes the only way out is through. I remembered the way she'd say it, her voice calm and soothing as she held me close in the dead of night. I didn't know what that meant back then. Not really. But now, as the shadows closed in around me, I was starting to understand. It was a choice, wasn't it? To face the fear or let it consume you. I had to move. I had to find a way. I forced myself to stand, gritting my teeth against the sharp pain radiating from my knee. I could feel the warm trickle of blood running down my leg, but I pushed it out of my mind. Pain meant I was still alive. Pain meant I could still fight. I picked myself up, my muscles screaming in protest, but I kept moving, one step at a time. The city around me was a maze of fire and debris, but I had to keep going. I didn't know where I was heading. Maybe there was a shelter, maybe a basement or a subway tunnel where I could hide. Anywhere but here. I had to stay ahead of them. I had to survive. This was it. The beginning. The beginning of the end. I could feel it in my bones, a shiver that went deeper than the cold wind cutting through the streets. Whatever was coming next, I knew I had to be ready. I knew that nothing would ever be the same again. But there was something else. Something that began to burn in my chest. A spark. A glimmer of determination I hadn't felt in years. I wasn't going to let this be the end. I wasn't going to give up. Not now, not like this. I took a deep breath, steeled myself against the terror, and pushed forward. Whatever was out there, whatever awaited me, I had to face it. I had to survive, because if I didn't, who would? Stay tuned for Chapter 2, Be a Hero. In the darkest of nights, even the smallest light can shine the brightest. The fight for survival has only just begun.